So, the Supreme Court has just issued a 6-3 emergency ruling that is already sending shockwaves across the United States, shaking not just the legal system but the entire political landscape as well. This isn't just another routine case or a minor procedural decision. This is something much bigger. This ruling carries massive nationwide implications, and depending on how it is interpreted and enforced in the coming weeks and months, it could fundamentally reshape the balance of power between state governments and the federal government. In this video, we're going to break down exactly what the court decided, what triggered this emergency action, what it actually means in simple terms, and why legal experts from both sides of the political spectrum are calling this one of the most significant emergency rulings in recent years. Now, real quick before we jump in, I want to ask you for a quick favor. Based on the analytics, around 60% of viewers who regularly watch these kinds of videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. If you find these breakdowns helpful and you want more clear, straightforward explanations of major legal developments like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, it helps push this content to more people, and it ensures you don't miss the next major update when something big happens at the Supreme Court. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into what just happened. Late last night, the Supreme Court released a 6-3 emergency order that is already creating serious tension between multiple states and the federal government, especially the Department of Justice. This decision centers on a major issue of federal enforcement power and could redefine how far Washington can go when it comes to enforcing or blocking laws passed at the state level. And once again, just like we saw in previous high-profile disputes, especially the Texas border situation, the core issue here comes down to a familiar constitutional question: where does federal authority end, and where do state rights begin? But what makes this situation different is how quickly it reached the Supreme Court. Typically, cases take months or even years to move through the legal system before reaching this level. But this time, the urgency of the issue pushed it straight to the highest court much faster than expected. In this emergency ruling, the court effectively sided with the states, signaling that the federal government may have overstepped its authority by seeking broad nationwide injunctions, court orders that block state laws across the entire country. Now, that might sound technical at first, but it's actually a very big deal. What the Supreme Court is essentially saying is that the federal government cannot simply use the courts as a tool to shut down a state law nationwide before that law is even fully implemented or tested. That represents a major shift in how legal battles between states and the federal government may be handled moving forward. So let's take a step back and understand how we got here. A few weeks ago, several states filed lawsuits claiming that certain federal actions, particularly those carried out under emergency authority, were going beyond constitutional limits. They argued that federal agencies were bypassing Congress and effectively rewriting or overriding state laws without proper legislative approval. In response, lower federal courts issued nationwide injunctions, blocking those state laws entirely. That means even states not directly involved in the lawsuit were affected. But that's exactly the type of judicial action the Supreme Court has now pushed back against. In this 6-3 decision, the court made it clear that lower courts do not have unlimited power to issue sweeping nationwide orders when the case only involves specific parties. In simpler terms, the court is saying, enough with universal injunctions. Federal judges cannot pause or block entire state laws that affect millions of people across the country if the legal dispute only involves a limited number of plaintiffs. This builds on earlier signals from the court over the past few years, where several justices have expressed concern about the growing use of nationwide injunctions. However, this ruling goes a step further by applying that principle directly in an emergency situation and sending a strong message to lower courts. And that message is clear: the era of broad nationwide injunctions may be coming to an end. Now, as soon as this ruling was released, reactions poured in from all sides. State officials quickly praised the decision, calling it a major victory for federalism and state sovereignty. They argue that it restores balance and allows states to govern themselves without being blocked by sweeping federal court orders. On the other hand, officials within the Department of Justice are reportedly viewing this decision as a major setback, some even describing it as a legal earthquake. And the reason for that is simple: this ruling doesn't just affect one case. It has the potential to impact dozens of ongoing legal battles across the country, including cases involving immigration enforcement, gun laws, election regulations, environmental policies, and more. Let's look at a clear example to understand the real-world impact. Under this new interpretation, if a state passes a controversial law, whether it's related to border security, firearm regulation, or any other major issue, a single federal judge can no longer block that law nationwide. Instead, any court order would only apply to the specific parties involved in that lawsuit. That's a major change. It means that even if a law is challenged in court, states may still be able to enforce it while the legal battle continues. This gives states significantly more room to operate and test their policies without immediate nationwide interference. And the fact that the Supreme Court issued this ruling as an emergency order, rather than waiting for full arguments, shows just how urgent the justices believed this issue was. Now, let's talk about what some of the justices actually said. In a concurring opinion, Justice Gorsuch emphasized that injunctions should be limited in scope and should only go as far as necessary to protect the parties involved in the case. He stressed that courts must return to traditional legal boundaries and avoid acting like lawmakers. That's a powerful statement, and a direct critique of how lower courts have been using nationwide injunctions in recent years. Meanwhile, in dissent, Justice Sotomayor and the other dissenting justices warned that restricting nationwide injunctions could create inconsistency and confusion. They argued that it could lead to a situation where a law is enforced in some states but blocked in others, creating uneven application of the law across the country. Despite those concerns, the majority was not persuaded. The court's message is clear: judges are not policymakers, and their rulings should not function as nationwide legislation. Now let's look at the political impact. Shortly after the decision was announced, the White House and the Department of Justice released careful statements saying they are reviewing the ruling. While the language was measured, it's clear that this decision significantly changes the legal playing field. At the same time, states are already moving quickly to take advantage of this new precedent. Several state attorneys general have filed new legal briefs citing this ruling as support for their arguments against federal overreach. In some cases, they are directly using this decision to strengthen ongoing lawsuits and challenge federal authority. At its core, this entire issue comes down to one fundamental question: who holds the power to decide how laws are enforced, the states or the federal government? From a legal perspective, the implications are enormous. This ruling will likely limit the ability of federal agencies to use the courts as a tool to block state laws on a broad scale. Instead, they will need to pursue more targeted, case-specific relief. In practical terms, that means many policy disputes will now have to be resolved through the political process, through Congress or elections, rather than through sweeping court orders. And that represents a major shift. For years, both political parties have relied on federal courts to achieve nationwide policy outcomes when legislative efforts stalled. This ruling effectively removes that shortcut. So regardless of political views, one thing is clear: the rules of the game have changed. Now, what happens next? Because this was an emergency order, it doesn't end the legal battle. Instead, it sets a new standard that lower courts will have to follow moving forward. The case will likely return to lower courts, where judges will apply this narrower framework when considering similar issues. And make no mistake, this issue is far from settled. The federal government will likely attempt to challenge or refine this interpretation in future cases, especially in situations where they argue that national interests require broader action. But for now, the Supreme Court has sent a very clear message: courts are not meant to govern the entire country from the bench. Stepping back, what makes this ruling so significant is the broader trend it represents. Over the past several years, the court has been gradually pushing back against expansive judicial authority and reinforcing constitutional limits. This decision is one of the strongest signals yet that the court wants to restore a more traditional balance of power. And in real-world terms, the impact could be felt across a wide range of policy areas, from gun rights and immigration to public health and election laws. So when people say this decision shook the nation, it's not an exaggeration. The ripple effects of this ruling will likely influence legal battles and policy debates for years, if not decades, to come. I'll leave you with this. Regardless of where you stand politically, this moment represents a major turning point in how power is divided between states, federal courts, and the national government. The Supreme Court's 6-3 emergency ruling is a reminder that the Constitution is built on balance, and when that balance shifts too far, the court steps in to correct it. Now the big question is, how far will this correction go? Will future courts follow this new standard, or will they try to push its limits? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: this is the kind of decision that will be studied, debated, and referenced for many years to come. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm and ensures that more people stay informed about important legal developments like this one.